Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our next episode of Tiger Eye Talk. I'm Lisa DeToffel, owner of Tiger Eye Solution and Tiger Eye Talk, and our guest today is Daniel Andrews. He is what I like to call a professional networker because he is very good at networking. And here comes our team member, Amy Garvey. Thank you so much, Amy, for joining us.
My
Let's
pleasure.
introduce Daniel a little bit, and then he is going to share with us more about himself and what he does in the networking realm. Okay.
Awesome.
So, Daniel Andrews is a native of Columbia, South Carolina, where he currently resides after an absence of 13 years. He owns a business showing business people how to identify, find, meet, and nurture professional relationships with key referral partners. Fundamentally, he shows business people how to stop networking and start building true networks. Love that. This is his fourth career. He's been successfully self-employed for 35 years. 49, you start with the lemonade stand in first grade. Awesome. I love that too. So tell us a little bit about how you started 39 years ago.
Sure. Yeah, I think every kid had the lemonade stand at some point, right? But
Yeah.
it wasn't a one-off for me. And what I mean by that is it went from the lemonade stand, to the next summer owning the lemonade stand and paying the kid who lived next door 60 cents an hour, penny a minute to manage it for me, right? I kept the profit. So then it migrated to selling greeting cards door to door, to selling programs at USC football games, to selling M&Ms to my classmates at school. Once I found out that you can buy candy at wholesale and sell it at retail, I'm like, okay. So, I've never stopped being an entrepreneur at some level. As a matter of fact, I did the math, counting jobs I had in high school and the one I had as an adult. I've been a W-2 employee less than 60 months out of my entire lifetime. And I'm 55 now. So yeah, that's something I'm fairly proud of. I started in direct sales, which was in-home sales, a referral-based business there, but not really at the level of the relationship building that I found that I had to do. That was here in my hometown in Columbia, South Carolina. Moved to St. Louis and decided to switch to a B2B model and switch industries. It was a chance to kind of become known for something different. I had done a really good job of being known as the guy that did the thing when I was in the Columbia in the 90s. And I wanted to, it really had to move to another. I mean, I didn't move to do that, but I figured the move to another town was my best opportunity for recreating what people thought of me and what I stood for in the community. And I didn't do well at that. I struggled. I thought that having a good idea was enough. And I underestimated. I didn't really understand the degree to which people like to do business and with people that they've been referred to, right? That the trust factor has to be up there pretty high.
Absolutely.
And so my first attempt at employee benefits, an employee benefits brokerage, failed. And I had to go out and get a job for a hot minute. And ended it the way I knew it would 2 years later in a fit of, I quit, you're fired, right? Because I'm not cut out to be anybody's employee. I tell the truth 100% of the time, including that's a stupid idea and you really shouldn't do that. And then when they do it and it doesn't work, I include the truth of I told you so, right? Anyway, clearly not cut out for corporate America. And but I had made enough contacts and learned enough in the meantime to relaunch the exact same business that had failed the first time. And I made it work the second time, and could tell a fun story there about the light bulb that went on in terms of borrowing trust. And if you think that's a good place for me to start, I'd be happy to share that. But what people view of as networking, and it's hard for me to say it without putting air quotes around the word networking as a verb. If people interact with me for very long, they will understand that I never say the word networking as a verb without putting air quotes, and I never write it without actually putting quotation marks around it. And I got that from the subtitle of my favorite book on the subject. And the subtitle is Stop Networking and Start Building Relationships That Matter, right? Networking means what people think it means, meaning they attach their own definitions, and I can't fight that. I think it's been beat down and kicked around so badly, most people wouldn't understand what truly networking is. So I don't even use those words. Network to me is a noun. I talk about building networks. I talk about building relationships. I don't talk about networking in the context of what I do, because
I love that.
Yeah. I think
That's
there's
awesome.
a huge difference between what most people think of as some networking effort. And I would identify most of what people do as networking and call it speed prospecting.
Awesome. I love how you explained how you kind of fail forward. When you first started out way back when, and then you didn't succeed. However, you didn't stop trying.
No.
Right? You go forward and you continued to try it, and then you restarted.
Right. Learned what I needed to know to make it work.
Amazing.
And was successful in that. And that came from two elements, meaning the work I did when I was employed was very, very niche. And I called on a very particular industry in a fairly large territory. But I realized that I had built trust with those people. So when I went back to my employee benefits brokerage, after the, infamous day where the VP called me and it was, I quit, you're fired, right? That whole thing. I knew that I had trust built. It didn't matter that I was in a different industry.
Right.
Right. Now I still had some things to prove there, meaning I couldn't just be like, hey, I just signed up for this thing, right? I'm going to do the thing. I'm like, hey, I have some experience with this, I've studied this, right? I know what I'm talking about. But the trust was there, right? The credibility still had to be reestablished, but it was easier to do because they were more likely to believe what I said. And so that was one of the ways that I leveraged, the hiatus that I took from self-employment. But also I understood what it meant to leverage other people's trust.
Yes.
And
that is awesome.
Continue to grow in that knowledge.
Amy, would you like to ask Daniel a question right quick?
I'm just enjoying listening to him speak at the moment. The borrowed trust and credibility, I would love to hear more about. I'm fairly familiar with that topic myself, but I think it would interest our audience.
Sure.
Yes, please expand on that.
Yeah, well, and we do this all the time in ways big and small, right? When we set up two friends on a blind date, right? Obviously, they are borrowing our trust in the other person, right? Now, we can't say whether or not they're going to get along, if they're going to experience chemistry, but we at least know neither one is a crazed killer, right? So that they're like, okay, I don't have much to lose by going on this blind date, right? When we take a movie recommendation from a friend, right? That's borrowing trust. Right. When we post in the neighborhood Facebook group, hey, my plumber let me down. Can anybody name a plumber that's not XYZ Corp because they let me down? Right. Who have you guys used and had good experience with? Right. And so we figure people that live in our neighborhood share our values. Yeah. Right. And it doesn't occur to us to ask, is that your brother-in-law that you just recommended? Does he owe you money? Is that why you're trying to get him a sale? It doesn't occur to us to ask that usually, right? So we borrow trust all the time in little and big ways, right? But when it comes to network building, and again, I can't use any other word other than networking, but when it comes to doing that correctly, you build that connection. Here's an example, Lisa, right? You and I have got a moderate degree of trust, right? I mean,
yes.
Okay. I haven't done or said anything in the time we've known each other that would make you distrust me.
No.
Right. And so I created a text thread yesterday between you and Talon. Right.
Yes.
And you're like, hey, let's meet.
Absolutely.
You weren't like, hey, Dan, tell me more about this guy. What the heck? What's it? Right. You're like, okay. There was enough information in the text. It was just a couple of sentences about.
We have a meeting set up already.
Right. Okay. So that's borrowing trust, right? When I say to you, hey, can you introduce me to somebody in XYZ industry? And you go, well, I know a bunch of people, but the one I like the most, or I think will get along with you the most, Dan, is this person, right? I had a fun experience yesterday. Same thing. Bernie Francisco, the second time he and I have met, I told him what sort of introductions I was looking for. And my God, I had to adjust my calendar because in an hour's time, he created 12, pairings on LinkedIn messaging, which is how I got you and Talon connected. And without exception, they're like, sure, Bernie thinks we should meet. Send me your calendar link, or here's my calendar link. And I'm like, but I expected that. So that's borrowing trust and what we mean by that. But you can't borrow someone's trust if they haven't built it. Meaning Bernie didn't give me all 5,000 people he's connected to on LinkedIn. He gave me the ones that he thought I would resonate with and that he resonates with to the degree that they trust him on the introduction.
Yep. Right. Absolutely.
And that only works because Bernie knows I'm not messing around, that whatever it is I have to say to these people is worthwhile. So we build trust and borrow trust all the time, but most people do it. They stop way too soon.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sometimes they do.
Right. You meet somebody at a networking event, hey, here's my card. If you need me, if you think somebody needs me, give me a call. I mean, I've literally had people start the conversation. I said, oh, Crosby Roofing. That's a big company. Y'all have several locations here locally, right? He goes, yeah. I said, you must be new, right? Because I haven't met you before. And he goes, yeah. Do you know anybody that needs a roof? I respectfully replied with that, right? They gave him a stack of business cards, told him to go get some business, but he totally missed the fact that he never asked me how I feel about Crosby Roofing. I have no feelings about them, by the way, positive or negative, right? I've never experienced them. I know they're big. That's it. That's what I know. He never asked me how I feel about him, right?
You don't know him. You just met him.
Correct. Yeah. And so people stop way too early. And in two ways, right? He had never built the trust with me. And I say build trust, right? I'm not asking him to wine and dine me, right?
No.
But sit down with me and show me, right, that you're worth my trust. But secondarily, he didn't investigate my trust.
Right.
Right. Yep. Does he want a referral from me? He doesn't know.
He don't know. Right? He don't know you.
Right. Because I found there's many people trying to scam the roofing companies. There are scammers in the roofing business, by the way. I fronted a friend of mine back when I lived in Houston in the roofing business, and I was amazed at the way people tried to take advantage of it. And I had to get involved with it because it was.
And that can happen in any industry.
Correct. Right. Correct. But my point is, he doesn't know if my introductions are trustworthy. Exactly. I don't know if they belong in his hands, and he doesn't know if he wants them. He's done zero investigation at that point. Right. So people just don't take the time. I don't think it takes a long time, right? No, again, you and I have spent probably less than 90 minutes in one-to-one conversation at this point, counting the time it took us to read the emails we sent to each other, right? Yes. Bernie, Francisco, right? 12 introductions after 2 30-minute meetings.
Yep.
It doesn't take a long time.
No, it doesn't.
But people don't even bother to do that much.
So I have people send me DMs on Facebook asking what I do, and I'm thinking, if you had gone to my profile, it says freelance copywriter right there. Right there. All you had to do was go look. So I'm delete. If you can't even take that much effort, we're not going to work together. I can already tell you.
Right. Yeah, right. And if they said, well, I get it, Amy, you're not going to work with me, but can you think of anybody that needs me? You'd be like, not in a million years.
Right.
Right. Because they started off with a low degree of credibility, right from the beginning.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Absolutely.
But you can borrow people's trust. And I'll tell the story because I think it illustrates some stuff. When I was first getting rolling in the employee benefits, brokerage, and for those of you that understand and know insurance, it was what's called voluntary benefits, meaning not the health, life, and dental that people expect when they show up for work, but the additional products, the legal shield, the accident plan, the
annuities, and all that fun stuff.
Yeah. The AFLAC. Right, and related, right? I never read AFLAC. But most people understand what AFLAC offers. Additional life insurance if they thought they needed it, life insurance for the dependents if they thought they needed it. The things that people would voluntarily have deducted from their paycheck. Okay. And there are a number of roles there, right? You got to meet with the decision maker, you got to convince the decision maker, you got to get in front of the employees, you got to do the paperwork. And so it's not uncommon in that industry for people to team up in a moment and to share some of the revenue. Right. Like if I got a chance to talk to 100 employees in a week period, I probably would need to bring a coworker in to do that. Right. And give him or her some part of the profits. So I'm in St. Louis, which is a weird town. I won't talk bad about St. Louis. It's a weird town. They really want to do business with people they know. I'll just leave it at that. Really badly. Meaning they'll listen to your value proposition and then excuse you and go through, I'm not kidding you, their high school yearbook and try to find somebody that does what you do because they'd rather do business with somebody from high school. Anyway, back to the point. So I've got this prospect. It's a large chain of car dealerships. Butch's family owns one car dealership in every brand.
Okay.
So it's like 12. Yeah. In all in St. Louis, not spread around the state of Missouri. Bam, right there in St. Louis. So it's a pretty big deal, right? A lot of employees. And I had found a guy named Bert who had some experience in the insurance industry and was willing to help me close these sales in exchange for 30% of the net commissions.
Yeah.
But I couldn't get started otherwise. So I'm standing there with Bert on the parking lot at one of the car dealerships, and Bert is talking to Butch. And Butch says to Bert, "Who is this guy?" pointing at me. And Bert says, "He's my guy." And Butch says, "I don't know him." And Bert says, "But I know him." And Butch points at me and says, "But what happens if something happens to this guy?" And Bert says, "I'll find another guy that can do the same thing." And Butch was like, "Okay."
Yeah.
And in that moment, I realized that it wasn't a good idea wasn't enough, right? Bringing value to the prospect wasn't sufficient. And Bert did Bert talk about me and how trustworthy I was and why Butch should trust him? Excuse me, why Butch should trust me? Did he elevate me?
No.
No.
Didn't need
Bert
to.
said what? You trust me, and I brought him in, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, now I can either buy trust at 30% of my commissions and borrow trust, or I can build trust and borrow trust.
Yes. Building and borrowing is the way to go.
Mhm.
And by the way, not just because it's cheaper, you may say, oh, for 30%, I'd rather, or 5 or whatever your finder's fee is, right? I'd rather skip that part, and give away the commissions because my time's worth more than that. Let me help you out. There's a soapbox I won't get on today because I don't have time, but here's the soapbox. Offering finder's fees produces fewer referrals,
Yes.
not more. Fewer.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And if you're not sure as to why, I'll make sure you guys know how to reach me. I don't know how to do comments on this. It's giving me some pushback. I don't know how to make that work. But anyway, I'll make sure that you guys can get my information. You know what, Amy? I'll put it in the private chat and then you can copy it into the comments or something like that for me. Does that work for you?
Yes, we will share your contact information with this video. Awesome.
Sure.
So explain your not networking or stop networking and build a network. Speak a little bit more to that.
Sure. Well, and then, the question, right, when we talk at length about trust, right, people then want to know, how do you build trust, right? All of us have a model for trust building with potential prospects, right? Somebody that we meet, we qualify, we prospect, we pitch. I hate that word. We close, we onboard, we retain as a client, and hopefully we get referrals from them. And whether people are doing a good job of maximizing referrals from the customers is a whole other subject for another day. But they have a model for that. And if they don't, there's 1,000 sales coaches out there, probably 100,000 that'll coach you on how to do that. But they don't have a model for trust building with people that aren't actually going to be a customer. Right. And people go, well, why would I? Well, let me use a very, very, very straightforward example. A real estate agent and a mortgage loan officer, right, may never buy anything from the other person, but can still have a huge influence in producing referrals and expertise for each other. Right.
And they work together.
Correct.
They
So
work
that's an example of somebody that may never be a customer, but you still want close to you. You want them to trust you and you want to be able to trust them.
Yep.
A graphic designer and a copywriter.
Divorce attorney and a realtor, divorce attorney and a mover.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Mover and a nursing home specialist, right? Assisted living finder, right?
And an auction company.
And an auction company, right? Nursing home finder and a funeral director.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
all sorts of combos you can make.
They're right. And there's all sorts of triads and quadrads you can create too, right? Which is why people tend to aggregate into networking communities of some sort, right? Because I can feed Lisa feeds Amy feeds Talon feeds Suzanne feeds Sajad, and Sajad feeds me, right? Maybe it's not a one-to-one correspondence, but the community feels very mutual.
Yeah.
Now, an ideal or a key referral partner in my world is somewhere where there is a degree of mutuality, right? And let me just, paint a picture. And I guess, do y'all remember, what is it, Karate Kid, right? Where he, wax on, wax off, right? The up down with the paintbrush, and we're all right along there with Danny going, or Daniel, going, how does this relate to karate, right? So I'm going to give you a story, and if you're like, well, that doesn't relate to me. Yeah, it does. It's an analogy, right? Meaning you've got to be able to transfer the information I'm going to give you. So I'm talking with the loan officer, and he says, Dan, based on the way the market works, a realtor can give me 5 referrals for every referral I can give them. Meaning people typically start with a realtor and then ask them, who do you know a mortgage lender, as opposed to starting with a mortgage lender and asking, who do you know a realtor. Right. Whether or not that's the way it ought to be is a whole other question, but that's the way the realtors of the world have made that work. So he said, how do I support these people knowing that the ratio is never going to be equal on referrals, on leads, prospects? Yes. And I said, Scott, keep in mind that you doing your job well is the best support you can give them.
Yep. When
they don't have to clean up your messes or check behind you or ask you to tell them where the process is, or, they don't have to tell the client that you're missing documents, or, there was a fire at the bank and we're going to have to delay closing, right? If you're on top of that, that's the support that they need. They're not looking at you going dollar for dollar, lead for lead, prospect for prospect. They're just saying, does it feel mutual? And he said, it's interesting. He said, you said that because I can prove it, but I never thought about it. He said, people, they take their business away from me because they don't like my politics. And then 2 months later, they're like, okay, it turns out I actually need you. Right? Because they unfollow me on Facebook, right? But they still keep me in their Rolodex and I said, see, that's it. You've proven that way more than your likability, right? Way more than having something in common with you. They're more interested in what can you do to make me look good, right? So the support, when I talk about the mutuality, right, it doesn't have to be lead for lead, dollar for dollar, prospect for prospect, but do they feel supported in a similar fashion? And the reason that's important is if it gets out of balance, one or the other of the partners, the referral partners, is going to pull away from the relationship. Either the one that's getting more because they feel guilty, or the one that's giving more because they feel used, or they can simply find somebody that will create some mutuality, right? So the best way to maintain a relationship is to find what the expectations are around mutuality. And that's the other thing people fail to do. They don't ask the other person what they need from, what do you need from me in order to feel supported in this relationship?
You should always ask how you can support each other.
And support is the key word there. It's not item per item trade.
No.
Not a broker.
Right. I mean, think of it, I would never use, these phrases, but think of it like the 5 love languages, right? The way that my wife shows me that she loves me is not the way that she wants me to show her that I love her, right?
Yes.
And so what does support mean to you?
Well, you're creating an environment rather than a transaction.
Correct. Right. And that's the objection I have to your average, networking group is really just a leads group. And the reason I can say that is the minute you drop out of the group, what happens to the referrals that you were getting? Gone. They won't talk bad about you. They just won't talk about you at all. It's like Ethan Hunt in Mission Impossible, right? Who? What? Never heard of them.
Right.
You think I'm joking? I got documentation, of the way that goes down in real time in this town, the town that I'm in. And it's mind-bending, but that tells you that it was never a relationship. It might have been a friendly transaction, and you might still have a golfing buddy, but you no longer have a referral partner. Right. Because it was predicated entirely on your willingness to pay your dues.
I want to acknowledge Linda Thompson has joined us today, and she did make a comment. She said, I have a new client that she got through a trust factor of another person who does consulting with him.
Exactly.
See, it works.
And this is the interesting part, right? You can find all the prospects you need, depending on your business, on Facebook and LinkedIn. As a matter of fact, you can find all the ideal prospects that you need there. But you've got 2 things working against you. Number one, have they identified themselves as your ideal prospect?
Right. Yes.
And number 2, where are you starting on the trust factor?
Yep.
0. There's no distrust. There is just not any trust.
There's nothing.
When you're introduced, you should have the confidence that there's a pretty good chance, if not, depending on the quality of your referral relationship, somewhere between a pretty good to a definite chance that they understand that they are a qualified prospect for you. Absolutely. And you're starting with trust at level 10. Now, can you lose the trust?
Quickly, quickly and easily.
You can, but you're starting with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so different. It's so different to start with it and have it to lose than to have to start at 0 and work your way up.
Yes, absolutely.
Very true.
Awesome. Awesome. So I want to thank Linda for joining us today as we wrap up here. Dan, what is something you would like to share with others that if they would like to connect with you, have a conversation with you, or, they want to learn more about you?
Yeah. Cool. I threw it into the private chat. So if, and again, I can't figure out how to make this, go to where I want it to, but if you could be kind enough to throw my LinkedIn URL right in there. And then that's the best place to start, right? I don't put my calendar link out there because it gets beat up pretty bad, pretty quick. But, once we've connected on LinkedIn, if you'll go through that step, I mean, that's the first screen, right? Kind of like, did you read my profile, right? But the other thing I'm going to throw a URL in there for, and if you'd be kind enough, again, Lisa or Amy, to copy it, is this is a really good way to kind of figure out if you want to spend any more time talking to me. Once each week, and by the way, this is an evergreen URL. You can go back to it whenever you want. But once each week for the foreseeable future, I do a very short online workshop on the difference between high value and low value networking spaces. right? How to tell the difference, basically how to decide where you want to spend your time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's 25 minutes long. It's very interactive. It is very informative. Even people that are very, very good at relationship building have said that is some very interesting language and some awareness that they hadn't really put into, into their own minds before. And what's great about this, by the way, is it's educational for everybody. Nobody's ever attended it and didn't say, that they got a lot out of it. Right. I mean, in all the times I've done it, I get mostly 8, 9s, and 10s. I got 1 5. I'm like, okay, I can live with that. Right. And then my question is, were you really paying attention? But anyway, I'm fine with that. Mostly 8, 9s, and 10s. Right.
Awesome.
But the other part of that is at the end, I will invite anybody that wants to into a further conversation with me, right? If they're interested in following that. So that's a really good way to kind of figure out if you resonate with the way I live my life and the way I run my business in terms of connecting.
Awesome.
So
also want to acknowledge another Facebook user. Sorry, I can't see your name, but they said, love your comment, Lisa. They're not looking for a transaction. They're looking for an environment.
Yep. Absolutely.
That is a great statement. Thank you for that. Amy, you have any other further questions for Dan?
No, I'm just excited to have met you and looking forward to connecting on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This was awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. And I highly advise any of you that is watching this broadcast to connect with Dan. You will benefit from it, I promise, and learn something from it.
Thank you.
Both, not just one, but both. So yes, do connect with him on LinkedIn, learn more about what he does and how you can possibly network or build your network with him. Stop networking. Like
there you go. And Mary Worth, thanks for identifying who you are. And if it's easier to find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Dan the Man with the Plan 1967. And now you know how old I am. So
Love it.
Awesome.
Love it.
Awesome.
I think we're all in that same age bracket, so that's okay.
Yes.
There we go. All right.
Thank you so much, Dan, for being our
Thank
guest.
you for having me on. This was
Truly
fun.
a pleasure.
All
And
right.
to everyone, we will have our next Tiger Eye Talk next month in May. We'll see you again soon.